conspiratorial view of history. It is the contention of historian Ralph Epperson that wars, revolutions, and depressions are planned years in advance, and that those who have been involved in the planning of these events have been ensuring that their involvement has been removed from recorded history. It will be Ralph Epperson's purpose to discuss the major events of the past and to remove the veil that has been utilized to cover up the secrets of history.
Welcome to Secrets of History. My name is Ralph Epperson, and I'm the host of this lecture series. And let me briefly describe what you're going to be seeing tonight and what this Secrets of History is all about. Secrets of History is a 24-week lecture series discussing the conspiratorial view of history as compared to the accidental view of history. I happen to believe, as we're going to try to prove in this series, that there's a giant conspiracy at work affecting the major events of the past, and that this conspiracy is at work even today in the major wars and revolutions all around the world. And I think that we must learn to understand that so that we can take some corrective action. I've been studying this conspiracy for about 20-some years, and about 2 years ago, in 1985, I published my first and only book called The Unseen Hand, An Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. This book covers what we're going to be covering pretty much in this series, and it's in written form rather than obviously in the lecture form that we're going to be covering today. I would encourage you to, if you want to get this book, I would encourage you to get a copy and read it, because I think it'll help you along as we discuss these matters. This is session number 7 of this series, and in the past we've covered certain aspects of this conspiracy, basically definitions of the terms that we've been using in the past, and also some of the historical events that we've been covering that will be given as foundation work for the material that we'll be covering in the next few weeks. Last week we introduced you to a group called the Illuminati, founded by Adam Weishaupt in 1776. We're going to see that the Illuminati is still alive and well, especially in the next few weeks, but I do want to cover the Illuminati from that point forward. I want to show you how the Illuminati has been involved in America's Revolution of 1776, the Revolution of 1789 in France, 1798 in France rather, and the French Revolution, the French Revolution of 1798. I also want to introduce you to Karl Marx, the founder of communism, and also the revolutions of 1848 that were all over Europe during that year. We'll probably have just enough time to get into the Russian Revolution of 1905 and later the Russian Revolution of 1917, when the communists took over and destroyed the Tsar and his family and the government of the Tsar. And maybe we'll have time to get into Cuba and the Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution of Cuba. But tonight I want to start our discussion with a little bit of material we covered last week. We were into the discussion of the differences between the basic philosophy of the Christian Judeo-ethic and that of Adam Weishaupt. We found that there's quite a disparity in income all around the world, and Marx and others have addressed this problem. Weishaupt felt that the solution was we should share all of our wealth. We should abolish private property because of this difference. We're going to see that in the writings of both Weishaupt and Marx, and later in the writings of Lenin and other communists. We see that there are differences between the old and the young. That's quite apparent, and we're going to see as we study these revolutions and some of the ones more current, like the Chinese Revolution, that this conspiracy wants to eliminate the old people, to just wipe them off the face of the earth. There are certainly various religious views in the world, and we're going to see that these many religious views have got to be destroyed and end up with a one religion, and we're going to see that reason will be that religion. We've also got national borders all over the world, various nations. The solution to that, let's go back. The national borders cause wars, and the solution offered by Weishaupt and Marx and Lenin and other people was a one-world government. And that, I believe, is still the thinking of this conspiracy even today. This thinking that the environment causes the problems that we discussed last week, I believe is very prevalent and is in fact being issued as the thinking of our courts today. I believe that the basic philosophy that the environment causes these problems is enabling the courts to let the criminal go before the victim even fills out the papers. I believe that our law schools are being taught that society is to blame for the ills and not the individual. The religious view, of course, is that the man is individually responsible and he should be punished for his crime. Here we have this philosophy that since the society is guilty, we must punish the society by returning the criminal to that society to punish the society. And that is unfortunate because we are finding that quite often that individual gets back out into society and creates the same crime over again. The religious view, of course, throughout history has always been that you must punish the criminal and not the society because it was society that was wronged. In 1982, Saran Saran, the assassin of Bobby Kennedy, appeared at a parole hearing, and he gave a one-sentence statement, a summary of this very philosophy. Number 12, Saran Saran said during that parole hearing that the criminals are the real victims of society. In other words, the society is not to blame, is to blame for the criminal, not the criminal himself, and that the society should be changed rather than the man himself. And we're going to see that continuously as we study the various revolutions of 1789, the American Revolution of 1776, the communist revolutions in China, Russia, Cuba, you name it, all around the world. That's basically the premise, that the society should be punished and changed so that man will be happy. I'd like to summarize all of these thoughts with this quote from Ludwig Feuerbach, who was one of the teachers of Karl Marx, the communist that we're going to study in a few minutes. Number 13, Feuerbach wrote, "The turning point of history will be the moment man becomes aware that the only God of man is man himself." Now that's the opposite position of the religious view that holds that God is separate from man and that there is a God and that he's the one that we should worship rather than man himself. And we're going to see that this philosophy of Feuerbach has been permeating the entire philosophies of the communists that we're going to study, Weishaupt, Marx, Engels, Lenin, others. Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati, stated when he was starting the Illuminati that he too was founding a new religion. And we're going to see the source of that, what the religion of Weishaupt was going to worship. Let's read number 14. Weishaupt wrote, "I never thought I should become the founder of a new religion." Weishaupt went on to explain that who would be or what would be worshipped in that new religion. He said, quote, "Reason will be the only code of man," unquote. Here's that concept that man is to decide for himself what is right and wrong. Man is to be the ultimate decider of all things in society. We don't need illumination from God or the Bible or any other revelation. Man can do it all by himself. As I said before last week, as we covered the Illuminati, introduced it to you, that Weishaupt formed the Illuminati and that the Illuminati had basically 6 goals. I want to cover those one after the other, and then we'll discuss them in further detail as we continue with our study of communism. Number 15, the first goal of the Illuminati is the abolition of monarchy and all ordered government. And we're going to break these down as we continue, after we get through, rather than individually. Number 16, Weishaupt's goal of the Illuminati, number 2, was abolition of all private property. Number 17, Weishaupt wanted to abolish all inheritance. 18, Weishaupt wanted to abolish patriotism or nationalism. Number 19, Weishaupt wanted to abolish the family, in other words, of marriage and all morality, and the institution of communal education of children. And lastly, number 20, abolition of all religion. Now we're going to see that these are the goals not only of the Illuminati, but of the communists and the humanists and other organizations that we'll be discussing in the next few weeks. By the way, let's talk briefly about the word, the Illuminati, the phrase. Let's briefly define that as close as we can. It's a Latin word meaning the illuminated ones, the enlightened ones, those who use reason more than others. So these are the people that we are to turn to decide how to live our life, that they will decide because they're brighter, smarter, more reasonable than the rest of us. By the way, here's what God said in the Bible about this concept that man should be wise and that there is no God and that man is capable of figuring out all things. He said this in 1 Corinthians 3:19, number 21, "For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God." So here we see that God looks with disdain upon many of our reasonings. Now I want to explain at this moment that I'm not opposed to or not talking about the complete use of reason. Here we're going to see that you can use reason and reason will lead you to God. Here they're saying, no, reason leads you away from God. It leads you away from moral absolutes. It leads you away from the permanent decisions in the teachings of God, and that we should use man's reason solely, and that man should decide on all things. There is no God, there is no revelation, there is no Bible. That's, of course, is contrary to the religious teachings of many, many religions. Now let's talk about the basic goal of this conspiracy. I think you can summarize it in 3 words: worldwide power. I believe we're going to see that that is also the desire of many of the secret societies we'll be discussing in the next subsequent weeks. I want to describe briefly what the Bible says as to who owns or who possesses worldwide power, because we're going to see that this conspiracy in the main worships Lucifer, Satan, the devil, and I'm going to tell you why in a few minutes. But let's ask the question, who possesses worldwide power now? The Bible answers that question in Luke chapter 4, verses 5 through 7, number 22. Here we have the devil actually taking Jesus to the mountaintop, and there the devil says, he shows unto Jesus all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil said, all this power, meaning the power of the kingdoms of the world, will I give thee, for that is delivered unto me. He went on to say, the devil went on to say, and to whomsoever I will give it. So here's an admonition, a statement that the devil is the one who owns worldwide power. And then the next part shows that there's a price to pay for this worldwide power. Satan says, if thou therefore wilt worship me, all shall be thine. Now it doesn't matter whether you believe that Satan can offer all of the kingdoms of the world to man or not. But I believe that some people believe that Satan can do that. And that's why they physically worship Lucifer, Satan, the devil. They want world power. Now once again, it doesn't matter whether you believe that or not. That's what they believe, and I'm going to prove that. And that's what I believe the ultimate goal of this conspiracy is: worldwide power. You might not believe in Satan, as I said, and I'm not trying to convince you that Satan does exist, but I will try to prove that this conspiracy believes that he does exist and that he is the object of their worship. Now, what did Weishaupt offer his members? Number 23. The pupils, meaning the members of the Illuminati, are convinced that the order of the Illuminati will rule the world. Every member, therefore, becomes a ruler. When you offer man ultimate worldwide power, man will do almost anything to obtain it. And we're going to see that over and over again, that for the desire, for the quest for worldwide power, man will commit almost any atrocity, murder, rape, pillaging, looting, whatever, to get to that goal. Weishaupt went on to tell us how they were going to achieve their goal of worldwide power. Number 24. Weishaupt wrote about the Illuminati, we, the Illuminati, must do our utmost to procure the advancement into all important civil offices. Now the word civil means of or pertaining to government, but here we're going to see, as we study Weishaupt and others who came after him, that Weishaupt meant not only civil offices meaning government, but he wanted them to infiltrate the clergy, infiltrate the world of science, infiltrate the world of education, the media, the newspapers, radio, television, etc. All aspects of our life. You name it, if it's important, the Illuminati is in it, as we're going to see in the next few weeks. Now let's go back to 1776 and start our discussion, or continue our discussion of Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati. 1 year later, in 1777, Weishaupt joined the Masonic Order in Munich, Germany. I want to briefly describe that the Masons are also called the Masonic Order, or the Freemasons, or simply the Masons. So you can call them any one of those 3 things, and I'll be using those words interchangeably. But Weishaupt decided that he wanted to infiltrate the Masons and to control it. And that's what he did by infiltrating them in 1777. Perhaps as you know, the Freemasons, even today, are secret, and that you cannot go to their meetings unless you're a Mason. And Weishaupt felt that that must be a good place to go to conspire to control the world, because they were used to keeping secrets just like the Illuminati, and he could actually infiltrate their organization and perhaps even indoctrinate their own members so that they would be willing to do what he wanted to achieve their one world government. Just 5 years later, in July of 1782, Weishaupt took the Illuminati to the International Congress of the Masons held at Wilhelmsbad. And there, Weishaupt indoctrinated the top Masonic leaders. And the next year, 1783, 4 professors, members of the Illuminati, broke with that group and revealed its true nature to the Bavarian government. In other words, they went to the Bavarian government and said, the Illuminati is going to destroy, overthrow, overturn your government. And it took them 3 years in the Bavarian government to discuss and discover the Illuminati, and they discovered that that statement was correct, and therefore there in 1786 the Bavarian government made it illegal to be a member of the Illuminati. The Illuminati scattered all over Europe, and in fact even came to the United States, as we're going to see, in 1786. Now there are two major sources of information on the Illuminati, the first of which is this book called Proofs of a Conspiracy. It was written by a professor, John Robeson, in the year 1798. This book is nearly 200 years old. John Robeson was a member of the Masons and was asked to join the Illuminati, and before he decided to do so, he decided that he would investigate them to find out what their purposes were. He found out what it was, and he wrote about it in this book. He called it a conspiracy. He wrote that book in 1798. The second major source of information on the Illuminati is a 4-volume study written by the Abbé Beruel, also in 1798. The two worked independently, Robeson and the Abbé, but they both reached the same conclusion. The Illuminati was indeed a secret conspiracy. Now this is a picture of our president, our first president, George Washington, a member of the Masons, and here we see him attired in his Masonic apron. In fact, George Washington frequently appeared in this Masonic attire out in public. In fact, in my files here in Tucson, I've got pictures of George Washington out in public wearing his Masonic apron and other paraphernalia of the Masonic order. I want you to remember that white apron. We're going to see it again quite often on other Masons, many of whom do not wear it in public. But George Washington quite often did so. So George Washington was a visible Mason. Everyone in America knew that he was a Mason. In 1798, a Christian minister sent Washington that book entitled Proofs of a Conspiracy, the one that I just held up, and Washington physically read that book. And Washington wrote back to the minister on October the 24th, 1798. In other words, Washington now is going to talk about that book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, and this is what he said about that book and the Illuminati, number 25. It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrine of the Illuminati had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more satisfied of this fact than I am. So here we have George Washington admitting that the Illuminati had spread in the United States. He points out that they were obviously all over the country. And then later on in that same letter, Washington called the Illuminati diabolical. Now I looked up the dictionary definition, and it's defined as of or pertaining to the devil. In other words, the Illuminati was satanic. Their members worshiped Lucifer. Washington admitted that the Illuminati was satanic and also that it was in America in 1798. It had come here after the Bavarian government made it illegal to be a member, as I said, in 1786. So Washington wrote that letter 12 years after the Illuminati had spread all over America, as Washington pointed out. Someone else also discovered the Illuminati, and it was a president of Harvard University called Joseph Willard. And Joseph Willard gave a speech on July the 4th, 1812, in which he made this rather interesting statement about the Illuminati, number 26. There is sufficient evidence that a number of societies of the Illuminati have been established in this land. They are doubtless striving to secretly undermine all our ancient institutions, civil and sacred. These societies are clearly leagued with those of the same order in Europe. These enemies of all order, please remember that, these enemies of all order are seeking our ruin. Should infidelity generally prevail, our independence would fall, of course. Our Republican government would be annihilated, he said. Now, isn't that interesting? He's admitting that the Illuminati was here in this government, in America, and that they were seeking our ruin, he pointed out. Weishaupt admitted that the Illuminati was indeed to be a secret society. He wrote this, number 27. The great strength of our order lies in its concealment. Let it never appear in any place in its own name, but always covered by another name. So Weishaupt said, we will be secret, and we will continue our secrecy and our goals under other names. So we can now see many of the very same philosophies, the doctrines, the goals of the Illuminati in other organizations, even though they're not called the Illuminati, and I believe we can connect the two as we're going to see. Some of the Masons did not agree with George Washington and Professor Willard, the president of Harvard. This is a Xerox copy of a book written by a 33rd degree Mason called Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, published in 1925. The author, as I said, was a 33rd degree Mason, Albert G. Mackey. This book is the encyclopedia for the Masonic Order, written by one of their top leaders, a 33rd degree Mason. I Xeroxed it because I wanted to get, I couldn't find a copy, but I could find it at a library, so I took it and Xeroxed it for my own use. Here's what Albert Mackey, a 33rd degree Mason, by the way, the 33rd degree Masonry, that degree is the highest degree obtainable inside the Masonic Order. You can't go any higher than the 33rd degree. So Mackey was the highest, actually obtained the highest degree available to anyone inside the Masonic Order. So Mackey wrote this about the Illuminati and Weishaupt, number 28. The coarse accusations of such writers as Beruel and Robeson, those two people we just mentioned, are known to be exaggerated and some of them altogether false. The original design of Illuminism, meaning the Illuminati, was undoubtedly the elevation of the human race. Here we have a little slight difference of opinion, don't we? We have Washington saying they're diabolical, and here we have Mackey saying, no, they're out to elevate the human race. Who's correct? Well, we're going to try to answer that question tonight and also in the next couple of weeks. Now, this is what Mackey said about the founder of the diabolical Illuminati. He said, number 29, Weishaupt was, quote, a Masonic reformer, unquote. He goes on to say, Weishaupt could not have been the monster that he has been painted by his adversaries. So apparently Mackey was aware that some people felt that Weishaupt was a monster, but he doesn't agree with that. He was a great Mason. I want to bring to your attention this little paperback called Parade to Glory. This book is published by the Shriners. Now the Shriners are an adjunct of the Masons, and you can't be a Shriner unless you're a 32nd or 33rd degree Mason, I believe. So not all Masons can become Shriners. But this little book appears to be given to the new Masons, after the two new Shriners, after they become a Shriner, because it's called Parade to Glory. And you'll notice here, this book was published in 1968, but it looks like this gentleman here is the top Mason, and he's extending the hand there to the new Shriner saying, welcome aboard, here's what this group is all about. He went on to point out that the Shriners were founded by Walter M. Fleming in 1871 with 4 others. The book says that a history of the Shriners was written by Fleming and 1 other in 1893. The copy of the book that I have, as I said, was published in 1968. And they quote part of that history written by the original founder on page 51. Let's see what they say about Weishaupt. Number 30. This is the original founder, Fleming, wrote this about Weishaupt and the Illuminati. Among the modern promoters of the principles of the order in Europe, one of the most noted was Adam Weishaupt, a professor of law in the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, who revived the order in that city on May the 1st, 1776. Its members were known as the Illuminati. So here we've got the Shriners, or at least the founder of the Shriners, admitting that Weishaupt was another good Mason who was on the right track, who revived the order back when he founded the Illuminati. Somebody is covering something up. Either Washington's right or Mr. Fleming's right. Not everyone agreed with George Washington. This is Thomas Jefferson, one of this nation's founding fathers, and he wrote this after reading part of Abbe Beruel's book on the Illuminati, number 31. Thomas Jefferson wrote, Beruel's own parts of the book are perfectly the ravings of a bedlamite. Now, I didn't know what a bedlamite was, so I looked up in the dictionary, and a bedlamite was a patient of the Bedlam Hospital for the Insane in London, England. So here we have Jefferson saying that Beruel was a lunatic. Let's return now to Jefferson's quote. Jefferson wrote, Weishaupt seems to be an enthusiastic philanthropist. Now, I don't know much about why Jefferson wrote that, but it sure seems to be that either Jefferson was right or Mr. Washington was right, and we're going to continue to study that question. Now, with a little understanding of the Illuminati and the Masons, let's start our study now of some of the revolutions that have beset man since the American Revolution of 1776. So we're going to study in turn first the American Revolution of 1776, the French Revolution of 1789, the Communist revolutions in Europe, all over Europe, in 1848, the Communist revolutions in Russia in 1905 and 1917. Now, there are basically two types of revolutions. One is a basically political revolution where you replace the government. In other words, you overthrow the king and replace it with a republic, or you overthrow the republic and replace it with the king. But you don't tamper with the social and economic life of the citizenry. The second type of revolution combines all three. It's a revolution where you not only overthrow the government, but you also change the social and economic life of the citizens. It's a complete new order, replacing the old order with the new order. And we're going to see the various types of revolutions, and we're going to see that the type that the Illuminati advocates is not just a political revolution, but a complete change of all aspects of human life. Let's start our study, first of all, with the American Revolution of 1776. We'll cover this in more detail in our history section. I want to cover now the connection between the Masons and the American Revolution and what type of revolution our founding fathers gave us. Which type was the American Revolution? Was it a type number one, changing just the political bands, or was it a completely new order, a changing of all orders of our life? I think you'll see and will agree with me that it was a number one type. It only changed our political bands. In 1969, Life magazine did a series on revolution. And by the way, I bought these back in October of '69 and put them in the plastic, let's hold it this way, and bought them and put them all together in this plastic binder. So that's not the way it came. But you can see the title is called A New Series Revolution. What are the causes? How does it start? And can it happen here? And inside here they cover a variety of different revolutions that we're going to cover. And we're going to see what Life magazine says about these revolutions. So let's cover some of those now. This is what the Life magazine correctly said, by the way, about the American Revolution of 1776, number 32. The American Revolution was strictly a war of independence. It left the structure of society in all essentials unchanged. So here it's actually saying the American founding fathers did not change all the social order. It only changed the form of government. As I said, the Illuminati intended to overthrow all existing human institutions: the family, religion, the right to private property, and nationalism, amongst others. All of the revolutions that we're going to study tonight are going to be of that type. This was confirmed in the Declaration of Independence when you read that, this quick short sentence in the very beginning, when our founding fathers wrote number 33. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. In other words, our founding fathers were very precise. They didn't want to replace the social order, the economic order. They just wanted to get rid of the monarchy. They left the family intact. They created a national border. They protected the right to private property. They protected the right to religion, the right to worship. So I conclude that the Illuminati was only peripherally involved in America's revolution. They did not cause the American Revolution. Many other historians believe, some of those who believe in the conspiratorial view, believe that they did. I can't find that evidence. Now let's jump from 1776 to the French Revolution of 1789. Those who write the accidental view of history explain the revolution this way, number 34. This is a typical explanation of the French Revolution. On July the 14th, 1789, a mob of French peasants stormed the Paris prison at Bastille in a revolt against the reign of King Louis XVI. The cry of the mob was bred because Queen Marie Antoinette, when the peasants had no bread, replied, "Let them eat cake." Now, we've been told by those who write the accidental school of history that the French king, King Louis XVI, was oppressive. He was a tyrant. He kept the masses inside in torture and prison and oppressive life inside the political prison at Bastille. And these people were oppressed and angry and upset enough to do something about it, and that, quote, the people, unquote, revolted against that oppressive reign of King Louis XVI. That's the basic explanation we've been getting for nearly 200 years. Now let's cover the truth about the French Revolution. Much of the revolution, the information we're going to cover, has come from this book entitled The French Revolution, although it's not the main source. I mean, it's not the sole source, it's the main source. This book was written by Nesta Webster in the 1920s, and in there she tells us the truth about the French Revolution. When the people stormed the Bastille, and we'll talk about the numbers who stormed the Bastille prison to start the revolution, they found a grand total of 7 people. 7 people inside this torturous, oppressive prison. 4 of those people inside the prison were forgers, who apparently had constructed some illegal document of some form, and 3 were lunatics. In other words, the Bastille was not the oppressive prison of the King Louis XVI. It was a place to put forgers and lunatics, and then only 7 people. In fact, the prison hadn't been used for 13 years as a prison, and these people were there only because there were a shortage apparently at other places. Why did the people who stormed the Bastille go to the Bastille? They went there for arms. It was a great armory, and the people who planned the revolution knew that. We're also told that the people revolted and stormed the Bastille. Let's talk briefly about that. The population of Paris has been estimated to be about 800,000 people in 1789. Yet only less than 1,000 people took part in the storming of the Bastille. 1,000 part of 800,000. Certainly not a popular uprising, is it? Yet that's what we've been told. The people uprose. Secondly, the people who did revolt were paid by the revolutionary leaders in gold. And we're going to discuss that in a few more minutes to see who paid for that revolution. Thirdly, we were told it was the French people. Yet the truth is that they were mostly Italians and Germans who had been imported specifically for the revolution. So now we can answer the question, was it a popular uprising of the people? No. Was it because the king was oppressive? No. Was it because the Bastille was the torturous prison? No. In other words, we're being lied to, or have been lied to, about the French Revolution. What was the plan of the conspirators, those who planned the French Revolution? It was to create grievances in order to exploit them. Now this will illustrate that principle. This is what I call the pincers movement. Let me briefly describe that to you. Here we have the government at the top and the mob at the bottom, and we'll describe those two arms in a few minutes. And we're going to see how they squeeze together to squeeze the people in the middle. Now, as you turn that strange arm on the right that goes up and down, as you turn that, supposedly these two arms go together. I had a mechanical engineer see this drawing that I made myself and say that if you turn that, the both arms go the same direction. I can show you this, shows you that I'm not a mechanical engineer, I'm in business. But anyway, trust me that, that if you turn the arm in the center, the two arms go together, indicated by the two arrows. And we're going to show you how this movement, this strategy of controlling the government by creating the mob and getting the people in the middle to demand more government as a solution to the mob that they created works. It'll illustrate how they used it in the French Revolution. We're going to see how they created the government, how they put their people in power, and then created the mob at the bottom. What was the goal of the Illuminati, of the revolution? It was to make the Duc d'Orléans the King of France. He was to be seated on the throne vacated by King Louis XVI. Now the way to do that was to create these grievances, as I say, that weren't grievances. They were fraudulently created, and we'll take them one by one. There's a total of 3 of them. And the intent was to get the people angry enough to go out in the streets, create the mob, to get the average citizen angry enough to demand that government do something about it. And then they were to blame the government for the angry grievances. So there were 3 steps that they took to create these grievances. What were they? Let's cover them one after the other. Number 1, number 35. This is the first grievance. The Duc d'Orléans, the man who might be king, bought up grain and shipped it out of the country. So that's why there was a grain shortage. This shortage of grain caused the people to get restless. The conspiracy then blamed that problem on the government. You might remember that it was Queen Marie Antoinette who said, "Let them eat cake," when the people demanded bread. First of all, they had no right to demand bread from the government. If they had only known that the Duc d'Orléans, the man who was to become king, had actually sold his land holdings in France to pay for the grain that he bought to ship out of the country, they would have known that the government had no control over that. They would have not demanded that. Marie Antoinette, unfortunately, made the wrong statement by saying let them eat cake, because she probably didn't understand either. It was hoped that they would be able to create the lower arm as well, the pincers movement, the mob, and we're going to see how they did that. The second action that this conspiracy created was number 36. The government borrowed large quantities of money. This created debt, and then the government passed taxes and then blamed the king. The people blamed the king. The conspirators blamed the king. The third action they took was number 37. The bankers inflated the money supply. They printed millions and billions of assignats, at least that's how I pronounce it, I don't know how to pronounce that, and these billions of assignats got out into currency, out into circulation, caused inflation, and the people were having grievous problems. The conspiracy had to resort to fraud because the oppressive king, as we've been told, wasn't oppressive. He was actually creating a middle class. And we're going to study Nesta Webster's book for supporting evidence. We're going to see that this conspiracy frequently, and in other revolutions that we're going to study, the Cuban Revolution, of Fidel Castro, the Communist Revolution of 1917, the Chinese Revolution of 1945, are all purposed to destroy the middle class. Now, who were the leaders of this revolution? Two answers, both saying the same thing. The first author was, of course, John Robeson, the book we've already held up, called Proofs of a Conspiracy. I won't find it again, but that's that little book, Proofs of a Conspiracy. This is what Professor Robeson said about who were the leaders of the revolution, number 38. The most active leaders of the revolution were members of the, guess who, the Illuminati. The second book on the subject is this one, called 1789, an unfinished manuscript, which explores the early history of the Communist conspiracy. It spends a great deal of time on the 1789 revolution in France. By the way, I'd like to apologize for the condition of these books that I hold up. These are my personal library copies, and they're all marked up inside and well read. And the reason I bring them, even though they're in this condition, rather than buy new ones, is to show you that I've read these books and that I'm using them as my source. In other words, don't believe me. If you want to, check the source to find out whether I'm quoting it correctly. But this man, this author who researched the French Revolution of 1789, says this about the leaders, number 39. France's revolution was assisted by the growth of the Masonic Brotherhood. So here we have two arms, two groups fighting this revolution, the Illuminati and the French Grand Orient Lodge of Freemasonry, the Masons. Now we're going to combine the two to show you that both authors are pointing at the same group, the Illuminated Masons, inside the Grand Orient Lodge. Let's give you a little brief history of the Grand Orient Lodge, the Masonry, the movement of Masonry in France. It dates back to 1725, when craft masonry was formed in that year. That was its founding date. By 1772, the Masonry instituted the Grand Orient Lodge. They formed together and created one group called the Grand Orient Lodge, and they named the Duc d'Orléans, the man who might be king, as their Grand Master. The Grand Master is their top official. In 1772, the Grand Orient Lodge was created with 104 lodges, and by 1789, the year of the Revolution, there were over 600 lodges of the Masons inside France. One writer described the Grand Orient Lodge as being a powerful mechanism for rapid revolutionary activity. Somebody figured it out. That's where the leaders from the revolution came. In 1789, during the revolution, 477 of 605 members of the French Parliament were members of French Masonry. That's over 80%. In other words, a good percentage of the members of the French Parliament were already members of the Grand Orient Lodge. This is the top part of the pincers movement. The Grand Orient Lodge of Freemasonry. They were at the top, inside the government, and at the bottom was the mob created by the Illuminati and the Masons themselves. So here we have both parts now in place for the revolution. Number 40. The French Revolution represented the first attempt to use the religion of reason as the foundation of a new order of society. Now here we see the basic reason, the mind, the thought that motivated the Illuminati and the Masons to cause the French Revolution. This thought that reason should be a religion. You'll notice that Weishaupt said the same thing when he wrote that the religion of the Illuminati was reason. It in fact should become the total religion of all men, reason. And here we see that the French Revolution attempted to create the religion of reason as the sole religion of the new order of society. And notice they wanted to create a new order of that society. In November of 1793, during the Revolution, number 41, the multitude, the mob, this was the Illuminati and the Masons, assembled in the Cathedral of Notre Dame to worship the goddess of reason, personified by an actress placed naked by government decree upon the altar. So here they physically went to worship reason in a Catholic cathedral inside Paris. They were actually going to substitute the religion of God, the religion of man, for the religion of God. Not only were they going to do that, but obviously to do that, they've got to destroy organized religion inside France, and that's what they did, number 42. 30,000 priests and monks were slaughtered in France in the bloody days of 1792. They had to destroy religion by butchering the people who were administering it to the people. Now let's go to the Life magazine study to see what they said about the French Revolution of 1789. And let's see if I can find the page here. We'll open up the Life study. Here's the 1789 Revolution. There it is. I don't know if you can get that whole thing. And there's 1789. We're going to read this little paragraph right here. This is Life magazine describing what happened or what caused the French Revolution of 1789. Let's read that, number 43. The French Revolution was not planned. It was not planned and instigated by conspirators. It was the result of a spontaneous uprising by the mass of French people. Now, with all that evidence, why doesn't Life magazine tell the truth? Why don't they tell us that the French Revolution was planned by the Illuminati? The evidence is overwhelming that that statement is true, yet they still won't accept that. We're going to explain why that is a little later when we study Life magazine and other magazines in America. Okay, let's now jump from the Revolution of 1789 to the revolutions in Europe of 1848. And to study those bloody revolutions, we've got to understand, first of all, Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism. Karl Marx was born on May the 5th, 1818, into a Jewish family. His father had converted to Christianity, and Karl Marx was actually baptized as a Christian. Marx's first written work was called The Union of the Faithful with Christ. Marx wrote number 44, "Through love of Christ we turn our hearts at the same time toward our brethren, for whom he," meaning Jesus, "gave himself in sacrifice." Marx was a Christian. Marx is going to, as we're going to see, reject that basic belief in Jesus and in God. Marx went to college, and when he went to college, he wrote this. I wish, the bottom part of this quote, "I wish to avenge myself against the God who rules above." There's a slight difference between those two statements, isn't there? In one statement he says, Jesus, God, the sacrificer, the person that we should worship, we should believe in. Now he says, I wish to avenge myself against the one who rules above. By the way, all of this can be read in this little paperback entitled Marx, a Satanist by Richard Wurmbrand. That's Karl Marx drawn on the cover in black and red, on the black and red cover. Once again, rather beat up copy, but you can see I read it. This book was written by Richard Wurmbrand, a Christian minister, and in there he documents the fact that Karl Marx became a Satan worshiper. Karl Marx went to college and physically worshipped Lucifer. Marx's long hair and beard were characteristics of the disciples of Joanna Southcott, a satanic priestess who considered herself in contact with the demon Silo. Marx, the father of communism, worshipped Satan, Lucifer, the devil. One more evidence. In 1841, Marx called the Christian religion one of the most immoral of religions. In fact, not only was he against it, he wanted to abolish religion, just like Mr. Weishaupt, Adam Weishaupt. Number 45, Marx wrote, "The abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of man is a demand for their real happiness." He wants to abolish religion, just like the Illuminati. Now, Marx not only worshipped Satan, he also rejected the God of the Bible. Marx became an atheist as well. Bakunin, who was a corroborator of his, a friend of his, wrote number 46, "Since Marx rejected the idea of God, he could not explain the human condition as a result of sin. He blamed all evil on the economic system, which he said had to be overthrown by revolution, so that the society of man could be restructured." Communism is not just economics. It is against all aspects of human civilization, as we shall see. Karl Marx wrote number 47, "The communists openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions." Now, what are those existing social conditions? The family, the nation, the right to private property, the right to worship your God, the right to practice absolute morality, against killing, against stealing. Marx wanted to destroy these signs of human civilization and replace them with, quote, social conditions, unquote, that are exactly the opposite. For instance, the God-based tradition is in a family. Marx wanted to destroy the family. God says we're going to create nations. Man wants to create nations. Marx says we'll create a one-world government. We have the right to private property because God said thou shalt not steal. Marx wants to destroy the right to private property, as we're going to see. We have the right to worship freely our God, or not to worship a God at all. Marx says there is no God. He wants to make it illegal to worship. And we're going to see that even today in the communist countries around the world, it is illegal to worship your God. There are absolutes in morality. Marx says we're going to destroy moral absolutes. One of those absolutes is thou shalt not kill. We're going to see that Marx and Lenin and others wrote, kill if it advances the communist revolution. We have been taught by God, thou shalt not steal. Marx is against the right to private property, and other communists as well. Everything is just the opposite in Marx's new social conditions. Marx also said he was going to do this by the forcible overthrow. The forcible overthrow. He's going to do it by bloody revolution. He says we must use force to replace the old social order with the new social order. Notice these are the exact same identical goals as those of the Illuminati. Marx was a member of the Illuminati under other names. To show contempt for family, both Marx and Engels had affairs. And we're going to talk briefly about this, kind of interesting. Marx had his affair with his maid. And we're going to talk about why Marx had maids in a few minutes. Engels had his affair with a friend's wife. You're not supposed to have affairs if you believe in the family or you believe in God. Notice, let's go back now to Marx. Notice Marx had his affair with his maid. That's interesting. Marx, the champion of the exploited working class, had a maid. That's not very bourgeois. I mean, not very proletariat, is it? That's more bourgeois, meaning a sign of wealth. The reason Marx had a maid is because he married the daughter of a rich Prussian official, and that maid came as a wedding present from the mother. By that maid, Marx had an illegitimate son and 6 other children, 2 of which starved to death and 2 of which committed suicide. Yes, Marx was a family man who loved the family, didn't he? No, he showed his contempt for God's family by actually causing children to starve to death because he refused to feed them. and later driving 2 of his own children to committing suicide. In addition, Engels kept Marx alive by supporting him and his family. He kept raising his appeals to Engels for more money because he said, quote, number 48, "My daughters must have a bourgeois education so they can make the right contacts in life," unquote. Marx, you're not supposed to want a bourgeois education for your daughter. You should want, your daughters rather, you should want a proletariat education, the working class. Marx, you hypocrite. A man by the name of Wilhelm Wolff died and left Marx an inheritance of 824 pounds. The annual wage of the workers in Europe at that time was around 4 to 5 pounds. So that 824 pounds was worth approximately $2,750,000 on today's scale. In other words, Marx inherited a fortune and yet never gave that money to the poor. He squandered it. Marx, the champion of the poor. Marx, you hypocrite. Number 49. In a letter to his uncle, Lyon Phillips, Marx announced in June of 1864 that he had made 400 pounds on the stock exchange. On July 4th, he wrote to Engels asking for the final settlement of the Wolff legacy. That's that money he inherited. Quote, Marx said, "If I had had the money during the last 10 days, I would have been able to make a good deal on the stock exchange. The time has now come when with wit and very little money, one can really make a killing in London." Marx, you're not supposed to make a killing in the stock market. Notice, Marx was a hypocrite of the first order. Wilhelm Wolff was a wealthy capitalist on the board of the Communist League, and we'll cover him again in another minute. Friedrich Engels is another paradox, Engels and Marx both. Friedrich Engels was the son of a very wealthy father who owned cotton mills in Lancashire, England. So Engels was going to school, and that's where he met Marx, and they became wealthy and didn't do much, didn't work much, but he got a salary. So here's Engels writing he wanted to abolish private property. And that's strange for a man who was the son of a very wealthy capitalist wanting to abolish private property. Mr. Engels was on a salary, yet he wanted to adopt a heavy progressive graduated income tax, which means tax me more. That doesn't make sense either, does it? He was going to inherit from his father when his father died, yet Engels wanted to adopt an inheritance tax. Doesn't make much sense. Why would Engels want all these things? Because he was not mad. Engels knew that these were idle promises, that he was going to join the wealthy and make sure that the wealthy were protected by communism. We're going to see that over and over again. Every major revolution that we're going to study ends up with 2 classes, the very wealthy and the very poor. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, here shown together, Engels on the left and Marx on the right, wrote a book entitled The Communist Manifesto in 1848. They joined a group called the Communist League in 1847, and in the book they tell us about the history of that group. Number 50. The Communist League sprang from what was known as the League of the Just. The latter was an offshoot of the Parisian Outlaws League, founded by German refugees in that city. After a turbulent 10-year period, the League of the Just found its center of gravity, as Engels called it, in London, where he added a new feature came to the fore. From being German, the League became international. Now I want to briefly describe what he just said and show you that I believe the German refugees were the Illuminati. Marx and Engels and the Communist Party said, we started with a group called the Communist League. I'm going to abbreviate that. Communist League. And we came from a group called the League of the Just. And the League of the Just sprang from a group called the Parisian Outlaws League. And the Parisian Outlaws League sprang from a group called, from German refugees. Now, they don't identify who those German refugees were. But notice, a refugee is one who leaves a country. Who was a German refugee that could have given rise to the Communist League? It was the Illuminati. They fled from Bavaria in 1786. They were refugees from Germany. I believe that the Illuminati gave rise to the Parisian Outlaws League, who gave rise to the League of the Just, who gave rise to the Communist League. You remember that Weishaupt said we must create secret societies under other names. In other words, conceal the goals of the Illuminati in another organization under another name. And exactly that's what happened, I believe. Not only did it happen, it became international. The Illuminati was now all over Europe, according to that quote we just read. An international conspiracy met in London in December of 1847 and formed the Communist League, the Communist Party. There they were asked, Marx and Engels, to write the party platform for that group. And they did so on January 26, 1848. They were asked to hand in the manuscript. Number 51, look at this interesting quote. This, by the way, comes from inside the Communist Manifesto. The communists themselves are telling us this. Number 51. A considerable delay caused the Central Committee of the League to serve notice that if the manifesto was not ready by February the 1st, 1848, measures would be taken against Marx and Engels. Results followed. What sort of results, what sort of measures would cause Marx and Engels to write the manifesto in a matter of days? I believe it was the threat of death. You will get the document out or suffer the consequences. That's a guess, I don't know. The manifesto was published in the German language on February the 1st, 1848. Now this is the title page of that document. Here we see them in German, the Manifest die Kommunistischen Partei. No, it's not called the Communist Manifesto. It's the Manifest of the Communist Party. Notice, if you could see the whole document, the whole title page in its entirety, you would not find the name of Marx anywhere on that document. It wasn't on the document for 20 years. Yet he's a hero to college students who call him a genius. In other words, Marx was asked to write a document for an existing group that was formed, I believe, 70 years before, called the Illuminati. Identically the same goals as the Communist Manifesto, as the Communist Party. Be a good place to break. Our time's running out. Next week we'll continue our discussion of Marx. We'll look at the revolutions of 1848. We'll get into the Russian Revolution of 1905 and 1917, and we'll examine the evidence that the Tsar of Russia and his family were not butchered by the communists, as we've been told, by the accidental school of history. We'll discover that and also the Cuban Revolution of 1950 or so, when Fidel Castro came to power. He was put there by the American government. I invite you to stay tuned for next week. We'll discover those truths and others on Secrets of History. Thank you very much.
To Secrets of History, a series of lectures exploring the conspiratorial view of history. It is the contention of historian Ralph Epperson that wars, revolutions, and depressions are planned years in advance, and that those who have been involved in the planning of these events have been ensuring that their involvement has been removed from recorded history. It will be Ralph Epperson's purpose to discuss the major events of the past and to remove the veil that has been utilized to cover up the secrets of history.
Welcome to Secrets of History. My name is Ralph Epperson, and I'm the host of this series. Secrets of History is a 24-week lecture series which will explore the conspiratorial view of history. I've been studying the historical view that holds that the major events of the past have been caused intentionally. About 2 years ago, I published this book, my book entitled The Unseen Hand. I've subtitled it An Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. Tonight's session is number 8 in the series, and tonight we're going to continue our discussion on Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism. We're going to examine Marx's 10-plank program to communize and advance nation. We're going to also start our discussion on the Communist Revolution of 1917 in Russia. And we're also going to see just what the real reason of that revolution was. And lastly, we'll probably have time, hopefully, to examine the deaths of the Tsar of Russia and his family to see that they did not die as we've been told. We're going to see that they actually lived and survived that death. In other words, our history has been incorrect. Last week we talked quite a bit about Karl Marx, the father of so-called father of communism. I don't believe that Marx was the father of communism, but that he was actually hired by, or actually asked by very wealthy people in his day in an international group to write the Communist Manifesto. We talked last week about the fact that Marx was a hypocrite, very strange philosophy for a man who said one thing and did another. We examined some of those last week. We're going to start tonight with our discussion and continue our discussion that Marx was reportedly anti-establishment, yet was asked by the establishment to write the manifesto. That doesn't make sense. He said he was anti-capitalism, yet Marx was asked by the capitalists of his day to write the manifesto. Something's wrong. Our history books are wrong. Marx was asked to write the manifesto by an existing group called the League of the Just. And they were the wealthy of their day, the League of the Just, the wealthy people of Marx's day. And they were the ones that asked Marx to write the manifesto. Marx was asked to get that manifesto out on the 1st of March, or prior to the 1st of March, 1848. And he was asked to start writing it in December. And apparently Marx was not able to get the document finished in time. But there was a rush. They had to have the document out, and they tried to get it out, and did indeed get it out prior to the 1st of March. What was the reason for the rush? Why did they want that document out so quickly after they asked Marx to write it? Because revolutions already planned to start popped up all over Europe. Now, we've been told by those who write the accidental view of history that these revolutions were spontaneous. And yet, I'm going to try to prove that they were not spontaneous, but they were the workings of the League of the Just, which was, as I said, an international group. The first revolution that started on March the 1st. So I believe that's why they had to have that document out as an excuse to get the people inflamed enough to start revolting. And the first revolution was in a town called Baden on March the 1st. The second was on March the 12th in Vienna. March the 13th, another revolution started in Parma. The 22nd of March, another one in Venice. The 10th of April, one in London. The next one was in May the 7th in Spain, and May the 15th, another in Naples. And during that year, 1848, over 64 revolutions popped up all over Russia. All of these revolutions failed. But that didn't matter because the manifesto was still out. And the manifesto lays down a program in addition to a violent revolution where Marx can take over nonviolently. And I want to talk about that because we're going to examine what Marx said in the 10-plank program to communize what Marx called an advanced nation. In other words, you don't need to have a violent revolution to take control. You can do it with these steps as well. And we're going to examine that. Let's start tonight with that plank with number 52. Marx wrote, in the most advanced countries, and by the way, America is an advanced country, as we're going to see, the following will be pretty generally applicable. We're going to examine each of these 10 planks tonight and see how they've been implemented in the United States. In other words, we're going to hold Marx's 10-plank program up to what's been happening in America to see whether or not this country is becoming slowly a Marxist country. We're going to do that. The first plank that Marx wrote, number 53, was abolition of private property. Marx wanted to abolish private property, as he just wrote. And we're going to start with the right to own land. Now, this is a map of the United States. And as you can see, we're in the eastern part of the country. We're going to go to the west. As you can see, the black areas, the area that's owned by the federal government, starts to increase the more you go to the west. And by the time you get to the west, you'll notice that the west is almost predominantly owned by the government. All the black areas are owned by the government. The white areas are privately owned. 33.5% of all the land in the United States is owned by the federal government. Now, there is no constitutional authority for the federal government to own any land except what is specified in the Constitution. Now, we're going to read just briefly from the little Constitution. By the way, I want to point out to you, this is the Constitution in its entirety in this little pamphlet. You can see it's not very big. That is the entire Constitution. It's not very detailed. It's not very full and lengthy. It's very simple, and you can read it in about 10 minutes. But we're going to read just what power the government does have to own land in the United States. Let's read Article 1, Section 3, I believe it is, of the Constitution. The Congress shall have power, Article 1, Section 8, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Congress shall have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district as may become the seat of government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state, in which the same shall be for the erection of, and here we have the specifications of the area that the United States government can own. They have the power to own land for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. So you'll notice that the government can only own Washington, D.C., which is the seat of our government, land for forts, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings, such as for courts, post offices, and office buildings for other constitutional departments, and that is it. There is no authority for the government to own 1/3 of the United States. There's no authority for the Constitution, no authority that the Constitution gives the federal government to own parks, forest lands, lakes, etc. None. There's absolutely no authority for any of this. Now, where did the Congress get that authority? It simply took it. Congress took the authority, and we don't object. Now, also notice that Congress, if they do buy land for the erection of forts and arsenals and magazines, they are supposed to pay for it. All places purchased, it says. It'll be interesting for you to find out from your state, when you see this thing, how much of the land in your state has been purchased from you by the federal government and to the state government. I doubt whether you'll find any at all. There's no constitutional authority to own all of that land. Now, the next question is, what happens if the government decides to sell all of that land, especially in the West? What happens to the value of land, of the privately owned land, if they sell all of that land? What happens to the county governments, school boards, and local governments, which are dependent on property taxes? If they did that, suddenly the rest of the governments of this country could hardly exist. How else has government encroached on man's God-given right to own and use his private property? Government can control land as well as own it, and controlling land perpetuates the myth that man can own his land without controlling it. We examined this in an earlier session of this series when we talked about how the government, controls your private property, although you own it. It's called fascism. And this country today, as we discussed in an earlier session, is a fascist economy. The government does not own your private property, you do, but the government tells you how to use it. Zoning laws infringe on the right to private property. The city of Houston, Texas, has no zoning laws. There are 5 good reasons why cities do not need zoning laws, and zoning laws infringe on your right to own private property. 1, non-zoning generally results in lower costs. By the way, I'm going to talk about several studies done of Houston, Texas, with surrounding cities, and they've discovered that the land is cheaper in the non-zoned area. It permits cities to adapt to change more rapidly. 3, the variety and innovation resulting from unrestricted private enterprise produces improved aesthetics. Number 4, non-zoning encourages private renewal and redevelopment. And 5, non-zoning provides more opportunity for the small businessman to get started. A gentleman by the name of Bernard Segan, who's a writer, has studied these zoning laws and has written several books on the subject. And he summarizes his thoughts thusly: zoning is one of our most pervasive forms of regulation. It has done well only for the well-to-do. It has generally been helpful to those of average or less income, unquote. But only Houston, apparently, is smart enough to know the truth. Other cities have zoned and rezoned, continuously violating man's God-given right to private property. Another example of government's use of control of your land rather than ownership is the use of rent controls, which dictate to landlords what they can charge their tenants in the form of rent. Many believe that this is the reason that New York City today has so many vacant and burnt-out apartment buildings. Rent controls have made it unprofitable to own apartment houses in New York. In other words, there are various forms of control of your private property rather than ownership. So we're not completely Marxist on plank number 1 as yet. The second plank Marx wrote was this one, number 54. Marx wanted a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. Now the theory behind this is that as your income goes up, so does the percentage of the tax that you pay. The claim is, by those who advocate a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax, is that it is to soak the rich, tax the rich, for the benefit of the poor. Now we got our heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax in this country in 1913. And I want you to remember that year, 1913. It's interesting that if that was the motive, that they were going to soak the rich with the taxes, make the wealthy pay the taxes, as in other words, the more they earn, the more they have to pay, then it's also strange that in 1913, the legislation that created the income tax also set up tax-free foundations that enabled the very wealthy to set their wealth aside. We got that also in 1913. Please remember the year. A few months ago, a radio program here in Tucson, although it is nationwide, I believe it's called Face Off, was on the radio. And Senator Teddy Kennedy was on, and Kennedy is supposed to be the liberal, and I think it was Robert Dole. Senator Dole was supposed to be the conservative. But anyway, Senator Kennedy said, or paraphrasing, rather, he said, I want to close those tax loopholes whereby corporations pay no tax. He said, that's not fair. The corporations pay no tax under these loopholes. We've got to close those loopholes because it's not fair for the poor. It's called discrimination. And he said the corporations have got to pay taxes too. It's not just. That's what Senator Kennedy said. Now it's very revealing that Senator Kennedy's family has a tax-free foundation that pays no tax. You might want to ask Senator Kennedy about that. Why is it that he doesn't close that tax loophole, the tax-free foundations that avoid taxes altogether? Senator Kennedy, something's wrong. Marx's third plank, called number 55, called for the abolition of all right of inheritance. Now, America got its first inheritance tax in 1916. Notice the year, 1960. And don't forget that the purpose of the tax-free foundations is for the wealthy to keep their inheritance. When you and I die, if we don't have a tax-free foundation, we have to pay inheritance tax. But the foundations keep their wealth intact inside the family and pay no inheritance tax. Ask Senator Kennedy about that as well. Marx's fourth plank called for number 56, confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. Now, an immigrant is one who leaves a country. And I want to give you an example of this. Not many people like to talk about this, but I do. In 1941, this is, by the way, we're talking here about the rebels rather than immigrants, but an example of that thought that we've got to confiscate the property of all rebels occurred in 1941. After Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, our government required that all the Japanese Americans in America leave their property. They were called security risks. They were afraid that they might sabotage their property on the West Coast. They were removed from their property. The relocation order was signed by Franklin Roosevelt, president at the time, the so-called, conservative who loves his freedoms, and the idea originated by Walter Lippmann. That's where it came from. And we're going to see more and more about Walter Lippmann later. We'll study both Roosevelt and Lippmann and find out why they believe that they can confiscate the property of rebels. They weren't rebels. They did nothing wrong. Also, in June 1980, Congress passed H.R. 5691, which made it a crime to transport money totaling $5,000 or more out of the country without notifying the government. In other words, you can't take your money out unless you tell the government. How are they going to prevent this? I believe one of the ways they're going to do that is create a new money that's going to have a metal strip in it so that the metal detectors at the airport will ring when you carry a suitcase of your money outside of the country. And if you don't notify the government you're doing that, guess who goes to jail? In June of 1984, the Wall Street Journal printed an article about the fact that the United States Treasury was considering the redesign of America's paper money. The new money was to have metal-covered threads inside the paper to, quote, foil counterfeiters, unquote, and that's what we've been told. But I believe that the metal strips will be inside the money so that no one can carry their money out of the country through the metal detectors in the airport. In other words, the American government wants to confiscate the property of all immigrants, people leaving their own land. Now, isn't that strange? We have to ask the question, whose money is it after you've earned it? Does it belong to you or the government? You might want to ask that question next time you want to take your money outside of your country. Now, I also want to notice a very strange thing happening worldwide. Our money is changing, not only in the United States, but all over. Now, we're going to show you 4 pictures in a row here, one after the other, of worldwide money. And I want you to notice in each one of the 4 pictures that the left side of the new money is all blank. Watch this. This is the first one. This is Mexican money. And notice on the left-hand side, the money is blank. Now, this is the next one I want to bring to your attention, is the English new money. And the English new money is printed just a short time ago. And notice on the left side, there's a blank spot. Now, the next money I want to bring to your attention is the German new money. This came out just a matter of years ago. And once again, on the left-hand side, the money is blank. Isn't that interesting? And the last one I want to show you is Australian money. And here we have the new money that just came out in Australia. And notice on the left side, the area is blank. Now, I don't know why they've done that, but it could be that that's the place where they're going to stamp on the seal, making all this money universal money. Now, I just find it strange that so-called independent nations are all doing something in unison as they reprint their money. Maybe when our new money comes out, we'll also have a blank spot on the left side. I don't know. Let's continue now with with a review of Marx's 10 planks. This is the 5th plank, and that plank, number 57, called for the centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Now, here we're going to see that the national bank that Marx wanted would have control of the nation's money supply and would create inflation and deflation as often as the communists wanted. Marx's intention, I believe, was to use inflation and deflation to destroy the middle class. Remember that Marx was a member of the Communist League, a rich man's secret society. Even though Marx stated that the bank was to be owned by the state, this was a lie, as I believe Marx knew. The wealthy in the Communist League did not want someone else controlling the nation's money supply. Every national bank that I am aware of is not owned by the state, but by private bankers. America got its central bank in 1913. Notice the year, once again, 1913. And we call it the Federal Reserve. But like all of the other central banks that I've studied in other nations around the world, the Federal Reserve is not federal. It is owned not by the state, but by private individuals, private corporations, private banks. Now, I've started a one-man crusade nationwide to change the name of the non-Federal Reserve to the Private Reserve. And we'll cover the Private Reserve later and show you how the private bankers got control of our money supply, just as Marx and the wealthy of his day envisioned. By the way, Russia had, as far as I can determine, no central bank until the communists created one after the Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution. That bank is also privately owned and is not owned by the state. So I believe Marx was lying when he said the state's going to own the central bank. I'd like to examine Marx's second plank, the graduated income tax, and his fifth plank, the central bank, and how they work together. The graduated income tax increases, as I said, the percentage of your earnings that the government taxes as your income goes up. The central bank increases the money supply, called inflation, and this causes your wages to go up. And as your wages do go up, caused by the central bank, you earn less money in real terms because of the graduated income tax. These two tools of the communists will do exactly what they were designed for, to destroy those who have their assets in money, the middle class. I'd like to show you a cartoon that shows Marx's second and fifth planks robbing the middle class, just as I said. Here's that cartoon. Here we see inflation, Marx's fifth plank, the central bank, robbing the middle class from the left, and the graduated income tax, Marx's second plank, robbing the middle class on the right. Just like Marx intended. The second and fifth planks worked together, and Marx knew that. And the very wealthy who asked him to write that also knew that. Marx's sixth plank is number 58. Marx called for the centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. America got the Federal Trade Commission in 1916. Notice the year. Once again, another one of Marx's planks became American in 1916, and we got the Federal Communications Commission in 1934. Marx's seventh plank called for number 59, the extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. I'd like to talk briefly about that, because in America, our instruments of production are not owned by the state yet, but there are inroads being made into areas traditionally owned by individuals or by corporations. A good example of that is Amtrak, our railroad, our nation's railroad, owned by the state. Our nation is more of a fascist economy where the state does not own the instruments of production, but tells the owner how to operate those factors of production. Let's continue with the second part of Marx's seventh plank, number 59. The improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. In May of 1973, a task force on land use and urban growth, sponsored by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, it's a tax-free foundation, I believe, made its report. It recommended one significant change in the land use in America. It urged the abandonment of the deeply ingrained idea that private ownership of land necessarily carries with it a right to develop that land. Those are their words. In other words, we're going to change the basic belief that if you own your land, you can develop your land. On June the 21st, 1973, the Senate passed S-268, called the Land Use Bill. The bill established a new national agency called the Office of Land Use Policy Administration in the Department of the Interior. That bill declared that the use made of land by individual states, will hereafter be within the jurisdiction of the federal government in order to achieve, quote, a wise and balanced use of land, unquote. In other words, we're getting creeping control and ownership of the factors of production, and the right to own private property is being abolished and destroyed in America, just like Marx intended. Marx's eighth plank called for number 60, the equal liability of all to labor. In Marx's vision of his utopia, you will work. All, he said, have an equal liability to labor. In America, the vision is that government exists to provide all of its citizens a job if they can't find one. Some recent examples are the Job Corps, the Comprehensive Employment Training Act, and during the Depression, many of you will remember, we had the Civilian Conservation Corps. By the way, I'm going to prove later in this series that the Depression was intentionally caused by those who wanted to create jobs or to convince people that government exists to create jobs. Let's continue examining Marx's eighth plank, number 60. Marx wrote for the establishment of industrial armies. Now, what's an industrial army? As you know, any army has soldiers that will go where ordered. An industrial army is an army of industrial workers who will go where ordered. Today, the President of the United States and Congress have taken unconstitutional authority to make all workers in America soldiers in an industrial army. President Richard Nixon signed this little booklet called Executive Order 11490 on October the 28th, 1969, and it was published in the Federal Register 2 days later. That means it now became law. Executive Order 11490. I invite you to get your copy and read it and see whether or not I'm telling you the truth. The executive order this executive order, authorizes the plans and assigns the responsibilities for a complete takeover of by the government of every facet of life if the President decides that such an action is unnecessary.